I'm a tone chaser. That thing you hear in your head that you just can't quite get.
Trigger was there somewhere. Anyways, I had the opportunity last Saturday to interview Steve Rosen, the author of Tone Chaser, my 26-year friendship with Edward Van Halen. He was kind enough to invite me, welcome me into his home in Southern California where we sat, and we did a lengthy interview. The book is Tone Chaser. The link is tonechaserbook.com. Steve was gracious enough to offer you, the potential readers, a discount at checkout. If you enter under the shipping instructions, discount code GIL, G-I-L, not my idea, you're gonna get some percentage off of the shipping. Steve's a cool dude, man. Steve's a cool dude, very approachable, a music fan, an accomplished journalist, and a good-hearted man. So, you know, check out the book if you haven't already, Tone Chaser. And I will see you all soon. Have a great day, man. How you doing out there? My name's Gil Yola. I'm a guitar player, singer for the Big Three, Southern California cover band. It's my pleasure, absolute pleasure, to be sitting next to Mr. Steve Rosen, the author of this book, Tone Chaser. Okay, tonechaserbook.com, one word. You can start making your way there in a minute. Steve, how you doing, man?
I'm good, man.
All right.
Wonderful to meet you, buddy.
Absolutely, absolutely. Some of Steve's credits go back to more than, I'm guessing at this point, well over 1,000 interviews.
Yeah.
His magazine articles can be seen in Guitar Player, Guitar World, Rolling Stone, and of course Cream. I'm going to date myself there.
Both of us.
Yeah, right. Additionally, Steve is a songwriter, a guitarist, and if I'm right, your most recent musical endeavor is, don't tell me, Highway.
There you go.
Oh, I'm going to draw a blank on it.
It's okay.
Go ahead.
Highway Sentinels.
Highway Sentinels.
Yeah, man.
The reason we're here is, one, this book, Tone Chaser, and secondly, a video, an absolute video that was just supposed to be a joke that I posted on my band's Instagram page on Easter Sunday. I am sitting there. I had just got Steve's book in a couple days earlier, and I post this video of Van Halen from a 2012 performance. Someone asked me where it was. I don't remember where it was. All I know is it was from 2012, and they were killing it. They sounded great. During the guitar solo to Ice Cream Man, the sound man faded to black. Halfway through the solo, Roth says, "Spotlight, asshole, wake up." And I'm sitting there, and I get up, and I rewind it, and I'm thinking to myself, I didn't hear what I think I just heard, and sure enough. So I paused it, grabbed my phone, videotaped it, and as an absolute goof, just as a joke, I posted it on the Big Three Instagram page. 3 days later, it has almost 3,500 hits. 6 days later, it's just under 22,000 hits. That's part of the story. When I got the book, I was reading the introduction. I'm going to say this about 10 more times. Tone Chaser, tonechaserbook.com. When I'm reading the foreword or the introduction, there's a passage that Steve makes reference to this something inside of his head telling him, write the book, write the book, write the book. Do not die regretting not writing the book. Okay, I'm going to give you a chance to speak in a minute.
I'm waiting, pal.
His cat Arpeggio wakes him up at 3 o'clock going ballistic. Okay? So Steve writes the book. As I'm reading this, I start to vibrate, and there's something inside of me telling me, this man is approachable. I need to talk to this guy. So I had emailed him saying, I got the book, thanks very much. And then I emailed him a second time after reading a second email back from him. And I said, okay, there's too much irony, too much coincidence here. Steve, is there any way that I can get you on the phone for 15 minutes? Fast forward the next day, we're on the phone for a little bit. I'm going to read something and then I'm going to shut up, okay? And I apologize in advance if I ruin this. To enable you to become totally absorbed by my story and to see every smile he flashed, to hear every note he played, to smell every cigarette he smoked, and to feel every triumph and sorrow he ever experienced, I had to become 2 characters, participant and observer. The participant was a dude sitting there with Edward in real time 26 years ago. The observer was a dude sitting at his computer, looking back on those astonishing encounters and attempting to interpret, analyze, and clarify everything the participant was going through, so you, the reader, might become absolutely and completely immersed in the story. Tell me about how you came about writing the book, and why did the cat wake you up, as you see it?
How and why did I write Tone Chaser? Firstly, that paragraph that you read was that was one of the keys to unlocking me being able to write the book. Wanting to bring the reader into that moment. How do I do that? How do I describe in absolute minutiae detail what it was like sitting there? And I thought, well, I can't do it as one person. Let me split into 2 people. So that was a really, really key moment when I kind of came up with that. And that's a very, I've never heard of anybody else doing that. And part of me said, well, you can't do that, man. It's never been done before. And I said, fuck it. I hope we can cuss on this thing.
Go ahead.
It's my book. I'm going to do whatever I want. And if you don't want to read it, don't read it. I wanted people to read it, but I wasn't going to be consumed or restricted by what I thought I should be doing. So getting back to your initial question, in 2003, I don't see Edward Van Halen anymore. The relationship ends, and we were talking earlier, and I don't really want to talk about that right now because I think it would detract from the reader kind of reading about those moments in the book. So if you want to find out, you need to go and get the book.
ToneChaserBook.com.
There you go. So 2003, let me backtrack a little bit here.
All you want, bro.
In 1985, I've known Edward Van Halen for about 7 years at that point. I first meet him in June of 77. So this is 85, right? The 1984 record is coming out. I think Sammy has just joined the band or is just about to. So they're arguably one of the biggest bands in the world, right? 1984. I mean, it's just like another level for the band, right? So I'm hanging out with Edward. We spent a lot of time together, and I'm thinking to myself, somebody is going to approach him and ask him to write his life story. And I think about that, and I think about that, and I think about that, and I say to myself, you need to ask him. You need to ask him if you can be the one to write that book. I am not that kind of a person. So for me to find, in Yiddish it's called chutzpah. To me to find the fucking balls and nerve, and I don't take rejection very well, man. It just really decimates me. But I thought, if I do not ask him this question, I will forever be regretful. So one day I'm up there, up at 5150, and I go, Edward, listen, man, writers are going to approach you. They're going to want to write your life story. I'd like to be the person to write that, and kind of puffs on a cigarette, and he goes, yeah, man. He goes, of course, I couldn't think of anybody else to write it. And for him to say that to me, it was like, oh my God, it's just like that. I'm floating at that point. So I start working on ostensibly what was going to be Edward Van Halen's authorized biography. We signed a couple little simple contracts.
There's a copy of the contract. It's written, signed, I believe, by his attorney, maybe, or it's just the two of you?
No, it's just the two of us.
Okay,
Funny
yeah.
enough, his attorney did not sign it, though that contract was
Valid. It's real.
was in front of the lawyer. So that is an interesting point. So I start working on the book. So I'm out there interviewing band members, guys he's played with in previous bands, friends, guys who are promoting shows out in Pasadena, guys who are where he was getting the necks and bodies for his guitars, music teachers, everybody, band members. I worked on that book probably for about 2 or 3 years pretty seriously. I wanted Edward to sit down with me. Ed, listen, man, we need to sit down. I need to do interviews with you for the book. I know we've done interviews for magazines where we've talked about guitars and amps, but I need to sit down with you and talk about your family life back in, Amsterdam, and what was your relationship like with your brother?
In the book you touch on, you keep waiting for that call to come. You keep waiting for that call to come. Today's the day.
I keep waiting for the call to come. Steve, it's Edward. Let's sit down, man. I want to do it,
Yeah.
That call never came. That book never happened. Fast forward, so this is 85, fast forward to 2003. Series of events go on. We stopped seeing each other in 2003. I think about that book. I think about it from time to time. Part of me tries not to think about the book because I was so disappointed. I thought, oh my God, I was so fucking close, So I tried not to think about it, but it was always there in the back of my mind. Comes to 2020, 17 years later, and I had a couple friends who kept poking me, hey man, you should write a book, And by then I really thought, it's been such a long time. One, I didn't know if I had the actual mental capacity to do it. I didn't know if I could recall those moments. I didn't know if I had the creative chops to do it. If I was going to write that book, it had to be, in my mind, every word had to be perfect. It had to be a reflection of who he was as a musician. You think of Edward Van Halen playing guitar and every note is perfect and articulated and passionate. And to my mind, that's what the book had to be. It had to be one long 600-page guitar solo, right? Not one wrong note. And I thought, man, I don't know if I'm capable of doing that. And I kept thinking about it, And right around that time, my cat, Arpeggio, was waking up at these very terrible late night hours.
May he rest in peace.
May he rest in peace. First it was like midnight, then it's 1 a.m., 2 a.m., and he was hungry, or he thought he was hungry. And where I was living at the time, I wasn't upstairs, downstairs. This wasn't Weepaw Way, which I write about. It was a place after Weepaw Way, a street called Jewett, and it was an upstairs, downstairs. So to feed him, I had to go down these stairs. I had to put all the lights on because these stairs were like 1940. That you'd kill yourself. They weren't code, man. And so I'd go and I'd, give him a can of cat food, and of course he'd sit there looking at it, and now he's revved up. So I'd shut the lights out, man. I'd try to crawl back into bed and go to sleep. And I was able to do that a little bit, but he kept doing it night after night. And one night I thought, you know what? I'm going to go to the computer. I'm going to sit down at the keyboard. And I remember the date clearly because it was my birthday, August 24th.
August 24th.
Right, August 24th, 2020. So I sit down, and in the back of my head, yes, I was sitting down because I had visions of the book swimming through my head. I didn't know what was going to come out. I didn't know if anything was going to come out. So it's one of those things, you try to let it go and let the book take you somewhere. So I sit down. I've always loved books with wonderful opening lines or opening paragraphs, Hunter Thompson is one of my favorite writers, and Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas, which is one of the greatest books ever written. And if you haven't read it, go read it. His first line is I was somewhere outside of Barstow when I saw the bats. I mean, it's so genius. It just, Oh God, you know. So
let me jump in here for a second.
Sure.
I wrote something down here. I was trying to do this without my footnotes, but I'm going to have to.
yeah, man.
Word picture. A description in words, especially one that is unusually vivid. You create word pictures. I learned that word when I was probably in the 8th grade, and it's never left my psyche. You create word pictures here, so please continue.
Well, I love that, man, because honestly, I tried to create word pictures on every page, and that's why I had to go in this infinite detail. And reflecting back on your fine reading of the intro paragraph, observe, participant, and an observer. So this observer could really, man, fill in the holes for that picture, and because he's seeing everything. He's seeing way more than this Steve Rosen guy just sitting there on the sofa. Man, he's seeing the whole thing. So he can really help.
Is he telling you sit up straight? Sit up straight.
Exactly, which I tend to hunch, and I hate myself for that. So I'm back there. It's August 24th, 2020, and I'm sitting down and I'm thinking word pictures. How do I capture that reader, that person who was used to hearing this guitar player playing these astonishing riffs? And Van Halen fans are rabid, man. They are protective of the band, and they love Edward. And so how do I do this? And it couldn't be, well, I knew Edward, a long time ago, and I'm going to write a book. People would have gone to sleep. They would have dismissed the book. So I'm thinking, and somehow I reflect back the story I just told you on the original book. So it becomes something like, hey, you're reading this book because you're not reading that book, and this is a long sentence, and this is why. And I'm thinking, that's pretty clever.
Yeah. You do a lot of, in the book, the writer, the observer has a thought bubble, and the writer is poking the thought bubble and letting things out little by little.
That's exactly it.
Okay, all right.
That's exactly because this writer doesn't know as much as the observer. So sometimes he's got to
Don't forget about this. Don't forget about that.
Exactly. Sometimes he's got to sit back, and I put the observer in what I call my notes section. So I call them various things: first notes, second notes,
yes.
whole notes,
base notes,
blue notes. So I kept writing, and I got, I think, that first paragraph, or maybe a couple of paragraphs, and at the end of it, I'm looking at it, and I'm reading it, and I'm rereading it, and I'm thinking, wow, that's pretty good. Next day, actually, I don't think I looked at it the next day, but again, that night, Arpeggio is up, he's screaming, he's hungry, feed him. Go back and I read what I've written, and that's the real test, man. Because trust me, there's no harsher critic in this world than me reading my own stuff.
The
next day.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it and I'm reading, and I'm going, wow, that is pretty good. That leads somewhere. If I can just hang on to that, and I can create that voice and keep that, So I kept writing, and then I talked a little bit about the book that I was going to write back in '85, and I think I touched on a little bit of my background, and I try to set up about the observer and the participant, and try to make sense of that and explain it so it doesn't become so, obscure that people going, what is he talking about? Because if you lose somebody in the intro, man, they're lost. So, long answer to your question, Gil.
That's all right. Keep going, man. Keep going.
So, at that point, August 24th, 2020, I wrote every single morning, and it was the morning, man. And you kind of get on a roll, and sometimes it's like I'd feed the cat, and I was like so tired. I was like, oh man. But I was really afraid that if I let one day go by, I was going to lose that thing, man, and this thing was going to run away from me. So every day, probably, again, depending on when the cat woke me up, from 2 or 3 in the morning till it was light. So it gets light, then, I don't know, man, 5 or 6 or 7. It was a good 3 or 4 or 5 hours every morning.
Bang it out.
14 months later, Tone Chaser is done. And honestly, so I'm getting to like page 350, and I realized, dude, I'm not even, I'm not even halfway there. Most music bios are about, they're about 350 pages long. I think they're about 125,000 words. So man, I'm at 180,000 words, and I'm not even close.
For all the interviews I'd done and for all the gifted guitar players I'd met up with to that point, nothing could have prepared me for the day that Edward called. Okay. You see that?
Wow, they have goosebumps.
So, Edward Van Halen calls. Exactly.
Edward Van Halen calls. I'm trying to recall that moment. I'm trying to recall the moment in the book.
The black rotary phone.
The black rotary phone. If anybody remembers black rotary Bakelite phones, right? You lift it up and the big heavy receiver. He calls and he wants to come over to my pad. This is when I was living up in the Hollywood Hills, up on Weepaw Way.
Do you still have the Marshall stack that you brought from Jim Marshall?
I still have the Marshall stack. I have a Les Paul and a Fender Stratocaster. So he calls, and the chronology is difficult to remember. I had actually interviewed Ed previously, but it was a phone interview.
I remember.
Right, and that was the first interview. That's the first interview. We're talking about the second interview here. So that was a phone, and that was set up by Warner Brothers Records. Backtracking just a little bit. So going back to June '77, I met Edward Van Halen for the very first time at the Whiskey.
I don't want to talk about that. I want them to buy the book.
So we're not talking about that?
We're not talking about that.
Okay.
We're not going to talk about how I purposely designed this. I don't want to talk about how he met Eddie.
Okay.
I don't want to talk about the first interview. I want to jump ahead to the second interview.
Okay.
If you prefer to do something else, brother, this is your time. Okay. But I'm trying to bait you guys. I'm trying to bait you if you haven't figured it out already.
Okay, cool. So the phone rings, and it's Edward Van Halen.
Yeah.
And hi Steve, and again, I had to interview him as a phoner. I hadn't seen him again since the first time, and he wants to come over. I go, Edward Van Halen, by the second record, is still living at home with his parents,
right?
Which is a very European thing to do, right? Those families tended to live together. So I'm thinking, Ed, I'll drive out to Pasadena. No, man, I'll drive out to your place. Sure, Edward Van Halen, you drive out to my little pad in the Hollywood Hills. So he drives out, and it's just one of those moments that is so surreal. It's times I wonder if it really happened. So he drives up and he comes in the house, and what's the first thing he does?
Let's back up.
Okay.
Let's back up. As I waited for Everett to arrive that day, I looked around me and thought, yeah, this feels right. It's the kind of place where a rock writer might live. The walls were covered with photos of some musicians I'd interviewed to that point. As I look around your current place, Steve invited me to his home. I'm sitting in Steve's home right now. Very cool, kind of surreal. The walls were covered with photos of some of the musicians I'd interviewed to that point. A comfortable couch lined one wall opposite where shelves were containing my books, turntables, receiver, and speakers. So he's on his way to your place. You invite him over. Okay, now, there's a lot here, but I'm going to read this, okay, because it's pertinent. And it sets up where you're going next. My coffee cup emptied, my brain swimming with a sweet caffeine buzz. I heard a car pull up on the street below. I looked out front my window and saw some beater parked in front of my garage and assumed that couldn't have been his car since I expected him to pull up in something fast, shiny, and exotic. I went into a mild peak of anxiety because I wanted to keep that spot free for his arrival. I opened my front door, started down the stairs, and saw the driver's side door opening. I was about to unleash fury the same instant I recognized the person exiting the car. It was Edward. He slammed the door and said, "Steve!" Now he's at your house.
So he's at my house, and I almost screamed at Edward Van Halen for parking in front of my house because he's in that piece of shit car. I forget what it is. I maybe mention it later on, but Van Halen fans know what that car is. And he was so proud that he spent $700 on it, and he spent about $680 too much.
Oh,
I mean, it was a piece of crap. I think by his second record, he's got to be making money, but That was Edward. So, he comes up the steps, and I'm looking at him thinking, oh my God, this guy. The first record had come out, I don't think the second record was out yet. That's when he comes over and that's when we go back down to his car and he plays me a tape of what is going to be Van Halen 2. And I'm listening and going, oh my God, and I'm trying to keep the riffs in my head. No, that's a fast one. That's a fast shuffle, and and it's like I'm not writing any notes down, thinking how am I going to fucking remember this, And then we go back into the house, and he pulls out, I think the Strat that I had, which I described as the brown piece of shit that I sounded like garbage on, that
wouldn't stay in tune.
That I couldn't keep in tune, and then he picks it up and he sounds like a fucking god on high. And we're talking about the songs, and he's playing me the riffs acoustically on an electric guitar. And look, we all know how amazing he was and how brilliant he was, and the Brown sound and live what he did. It's an entirely different thing. Listening to somebody playing on an electric acoustically, and now you can hear, every pick attack, and there's no sustain, and there's no hiding behind anything.
May I?
Yeah, man, go ahead.
Okay, it's totally prudent to where you're at.
Excellent.
Okay. So there I was, sitting 3 feet away from the undisputed maestro of things, all things strings, playing my guitar.
All things strings. That's when you know you're in the presence of somebody special, right? I mean, They say that, if you can tell somebody who it is by one note, and there are some astonishing guitar players in this world. There aren't many guys that you can hear them play one note.
Yngwie Malmsteen is going to rip 33 notes in 7 seconds. Jeff Beck will bend one note
exactly
3 different ways in that same duration and say much more than most people can.
Jeff, Edward,
Hendrix,
Richie Blackmore, I think is pretty unsung. But it was remarkable. So I'm watching him play these riffs and watching his right hand attack and the way his fingers, were placed on the fretboard and I talk about in there how long his fingers were, and all these guys have fingers like that. Steve Vai, my God, have you ever seen his fingers?
Met him once.
And there's some pictures. We can even go right, and you can see their fingers and mine. Mine are like these little mutated stumps, and theirs are like just tree limbs, So, so Edward Van Halen is sitting on my couch, smoking a cigarette in my place, which is making me nauseous because I was susceptible to migraine headaches. And cigarette smoke was one of the key triggers. And I'm inhaling his cigarette smoke and thinking, my God, please don't let this day ever end. It was just one of those high water marks in my life. And I knew it at the time. I realized that, being there with him, a nascent part of his career that, he's starting to get big, but it's still on the second record, so he's not a legend quite yet,
So in context, and I'm leaving a lot out intentionally because I want you to get the book, all right? But in context, what's going on is Eddie Van Halen is teaching Steve how to do the hammer-ons.
Yeah.
Okay? So having said that, as I played it, and this was after several attempts, and you are very defacing would be, or self-deprecating would be the word I want to use here.
I am the worst.
You have to get in line, buddy. So, in context, Eddie Van Halen's at his house. They're playing guitar, and Eddie's teaching him how to do the hammer-ons. As I played it, I heard Ed recorded voice. So, again, context, he's listening to tapes as he's writing this book.
Exactly.
I heard Ed's recorded voice in the background saying, "That's it!" 2 little words, 7 letters, and an apostrophe, and I was moved and touched by that just as about any compliment I was ever paid. Okay, from a humanistic perspective, you touch on it, it's almost like there's 2 people. two people in the room, two individuals in the room, you and Edward, but four people. There's you, the child in you, and there's Ed and the child and him that's asking for potato chips. And you touch on that story too.
That's good, man.
Okay, there's something developing here, okay? I have friends that are more like brothers. I don't call it friendship, I call it brotherhood. There's a brotherhood. There's a thread being woven here, right?
I mean, I love that you see it like that, man, because I really believe that's what it was. You know, people will ask the question, well, when along that, you know, along your journey, did you become friends with Edward Van Halen? And, you know, it's an impossible question to quantify. I mean, I can't say 2 years and 3 days into it, you know, but that kind of a moment, for him to, obviously I butchered the fuck out of the thing. For him, and maybe it's a child in him that wanted that reassurance from his mother, and that is a relationship that we talk about a little bit, you know, and maybe that was something that he got from me without trying to be the fan, but trying to just give him these things that I think that maybe he needed or wanted in his life. For him to say that, that's it. He didn't have to say it, and I'm sure I
think he meant it. I'm in the room, the fly, and I think he meant it.
No, and I believe he did. But as you pointed out, he really understood how desperately, and I say desperately, I wanted to hear it, because I was never a great guitar player. I was a good guitar player, but for this guy, for Picasso to say, yeah, good picture. You know, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
so,
that
child.
you,
yeah, so the four people, the child, and yeah, for him asking for potato chips and things like that.
This book really, it resonates with me, man.
That's so cool. You know, and people abuse the word, and I love the word, and I never thought about it, is that I humanized Edward. And I mean, subconsciously, that's what I was trying to do. I didn't think that was going to be possible, you know. But if I did that in even the smallest way, then I really succeeded in what I was trying to do with the book, because there was that other side of him, which made him all the more remarkable. You know, I mean, a lot of rock stars we look at, and they don't seem to be vulnerable at all.
Still at the second interview, Edward returned for a second visit somewhere around January 1979. Only this time, he brought a yellow and black striped guitar with him, which would later come to be known as the Bumblebee guitar. You played Bumblebee.
I did.
Unfortunately, Bumblebee is resting with Dimebag Darrell.
Oh, right.
You know, the story is true. That's it.
Oh yeah, no. I'm sure it's true. He loved the dime. I'm sure
he let you play Bumblebee.
You know, and Ed was never precious with his instruments at all.
No,
never. And I don't think you've gotten to that chapter yet about the Les Pauls.
No.
Oh my God, you'll love that chapter. Readers, you will love this chapter. Two of the most beautiful Les Pauls you've ever seen in your life, and what Edward does to them.
He cuts them out.
Well, eventually he would, but even the way he treated them when he was at the house. But yeah, it's like, hey man, he goes, yeah, you want to play my guitar? I go, yeah. It played like shit. I mean, it just, you think that it would play itself. For me, it wasn't like that, you know. I mean, he has his, his vibrato bar is locked. Right. In other words, you can't, and you know, when you can pull back on it, you know, pull up, and it's infinitely easier, and the tension is much less. His, because I think he had like 4 springs, you know. I mean, it really,
which is why to get a dive down.
Exactly, you know. And I suppose, you know, if you're used to that, you know, it sounds amazing, but for me, it wasn't, you know. And so he's playing my Defender Strat, you know, and then at a point in time, I realized, you know, he probably wanted his guitar back. He goes, oh, you want to trade back? I goes, no, I just play, you know. It didn't matter what he was playing. I mean, it really did.
You can tell it was him.
Oh, my God. And on the other side of it, I sounded equally as bad on any guitar I played. So I had that going for me, you know.
So I'm going to touch on your self-deprecating nature and quality for a second here. After sitting there for what must have been around 15 minutes and demolishing and destroying every riff he tried to show me, he did the most unlikely thing. Go on, try this one for a while, and handed over the Bumblebee guitar. It's totally different. The neck's just different than that of a Fender. Listening to the tape, I can hear him passing the guitar to me while I handed over my strap to him. I road tested the Bumblebee. Next I heard on the tape was something so startling I never would have believed it possible had I not heard with my own ears. I was playing like Eddie Van Halen. I was zooming up and down the neck, flawless execution, articulating intricate hammer-ons and whammy figures, and mimicking his flutter technique like I'd been born with it. While I was strumming around the frets, Ed confessed, "I didn't know you can play like that. Steve, you're a really good guitar player." He's joking. You had me, and I'm like, oh man,
Did I get you?
Absolutely. In truth, I was the same guitar player as I was on mine, and actually sounded worse on the Bumblebee because I had never played it before. And it really did play altogether differently from that Fender. Favorite Eddie Van Halen memory?
There's so many. I mean, you know, him saying that's it, that's unbelievable. You know, him saying to me, yeah, man, you can write the book, there couldn't be anybody else, that was unbelievable. You know, we have conversations, and I write about that, and I call those the Twilight tapes, where the stuff got really deep, and it wasn't really just about music, it was just two people talking, you know. He would say things to me, and he'd be supportive. God, it was just simple things, you know. The first time, you know, because I'd see him, you know, and, you know, we say hello and stuff. And then the first time, you know, he hugs me. I thought, oh my God, that's amazing, you know. And then, you know, he'd hug me, and then he'd kiss me on the cheek.
He told you he loved you.
He
said,
did.
I love you, Steve.
He said that all the time, man. And I have that on the tape, you know. If nobody believes that, it's the truth, you know. And I believe he did, you know, in his way. And, you know, I'll be honest, it was hard for me to say I love you, you know, but I did. You know, I'm not that kind of person. But again, I think it was that European thing. It was just so many of those amazing moments. He just made me feel so, I don't know, man, secure, and I had self-respect for myself, and, you know, trying not to measure myself against this guy, because I mean, that, you know, you can't do that. And I've seen people try to do that, and it doesn't end up well, because no one's going to measure up to somebody like that.
I want to thank you once again for your time. It's been a pleasure meeting you. I look forward to listening to your music online, and hopefully to stand in front of you at some point in the future, man.
That's great, man. I appreciate you coming down here and hanging out and saying all these nice things about the book. And yeah, if I just might say in closing, as maybe the most modest person on the face of the planet, I think this is a good book. And I think that if you're a Van Halen fan, you will really walk away learning something about Edward Van Halen. And if you get the book and you don't feel that way, you let me know and I'll send you back your money. So I think it's a book that deserves to be out there in the world. And yeah, I hope you check it out, and I hope you'll love it as much as I loved writing it. Thanks, guys.
Thanks for your time, you guys. ToneChaserBook.com. Have a great day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye-bye.
Hey, Tone Chasers. How are you? Look, guys, I hope you dug the interview. Listen, I know a lot of you have written and left comments, and you have dug the interview. If you'd like to show your appreciation, I would really love a review up on Amazon. Just go to Amazon. You can type in Tone Chaser. You'll find my page. If you didn't buy the book on Amazon, it's cool. You can still leave a review. So that's about it, guys. I will talk to you later. Volume 3 is here, T3. So I hope you guys have your copies. And if not, you can go check it out on my webpage, tonechaserbook.com. See you, everybody. Thank you. V for Van Halen.